next door to where the reptile rapture, whatever that place was, down in that. This is another little wrinkle to that project.
Yeah.
Typically,
Okay, we are live.
on average.
So the next one,
Short-term rental.
Just curious.
we're not going to take any action on H tonight because it will come back next week.
Yes.
I think the only one we have left is the short-term rentals. Is that right, Mark?
Correct.
Okay, so the next item, consideration of ordinance 2-23-765, creating chapter 367 of the Code of Ordinances regulating short-term rental properties, and this is put forth by the mayor. And I think we've all, well, we all have the proposed ordinance here. Bill, do you want to explain a little bit about how you came to come up with
Sure.
this version?
Thanks, Mayor. After the last meeting, and after I received input from many of you, and there seemed to be a general consensus that you wanted it consistent with the Madison ordinance so that the two would be applied consistently no matter which jurisdiction. So I ended up taking the Madison ordinance and working off of that. So what's in front of you is the Madison ordinance with the changes I indicated to you, principally to try to incorporate some of the other changes you had requested in your emails to me. So this is the Madison ordinance with what I would describe as slight modifications. There are modifications, as I showed to you, not a lot though. It generally tries to follow the theme of the Madison ordinance. I did take out the reference to corporate ownership, and I believe there was several of you that wanted to preclude corporate ownership. I did have that reviewed by my office. I remain of the opinion that that would be problematic from a legal standpoint. And the way this is drafted, I don't believe is necessary to include, because you do still, well, theoretically you could, as drafted right now, a corporate entity could own a STR. If it's not the principal residence of the operator, it has to be rented for no less than 6 consecutive days. So theoretically, you could, since a corporation doesn't have a principal residence, the only way a corporate-owned STR would be able to operate under this ordinance would be for renting for periods of 6 consecutive days or more. But that's, in summary, that's sort of how we got from last time this was reconsidered by you until now.
Alderman Moore.
Yes, I have a question about the corporate residence thing. So, what, if I just heard you correctly, what you're saying is that somebody could be an LLC or corporation in some way, but it still has to be their primary residence?
No, they could, corporations don't have primary residences. You know, they're not living people. They don't have residences. So as drafted, a corporate entity could buy a piece of real estate. Mm-hmm. It would not be the principal residence. Therefore, they can only rent it for periods of 6 days or more. The only STR operators that can rent for periods less than 6 days would be those that it is their primary residence.
Okay, because I guess when I wasn't saying corporate per se, but I was also included in that thought was also trusts, and we know that there's like gazillions of properties in Winona that are actually trusts.
Yeah, and I was using corporate entity in the broadest sense. It would include any ownership other than a natural person. So it would be trusts, corporations, LLCs, partnerships, limited partnerships, and any entity other than people.
And you really believe that it's not possible for us to preclude that?
Oh, you can preclude it. I think if challenged, though, it would be It's pretty clear that corporations have the same rights with respect to this sort of stuff as natural persons.
Remember, corporations are people.
Yeah, I know. It's just, that's still, I mean, I appreciate that it could be challenged, but
Yeah.
I mean, it really doesn't solve a big problem. This goes, I mean, I just actually learned of 3 new services that are the equivalent of Airbnb
Yeah.
that I'd never even heard of before. I mean, this is an exploding scene. And you know, I mean, it's just causing
Yeah.
real havoc in communities. Communities are becoming less of communities because there's so many entities that are no longer have permanent residents in them. They're just rental units owned by a corporation, and obviously that have no skin in the community or how, you know. I mean, like, I just went for a walk this weekend on Saturday, and one of the biggest, oldest landmarks in the entire city, a big white, beautiful old house on Toniwaka, is an Airbnb. I mean, they've got a for rent sign up in front of it constantly. So it's not like it's just some small, you know, it's happening with some of our most major residences, not to mention the former mayor's house that's renting for $2,000 a night. So it concerns me because it not only does it impact the sense of community, but it is driving up housing prices at a time when, I mean, it has absolutely, all the research shows that having the Airbnbs drives up housing prices at a time when we're all concerned about affordable housing. So it just seems like we're beating our head against a wall.
But
I think Alder Thomas is. Gabby?
So I have one question and a couple of comments. My first question is this ordinance retroactive to current ones? That's one. 2, what is to stop me, Bill, from Attorney Cole, from buying a house, putting it in trust, and then allowing us to do it? And if you can't restrict corps and LLCs, can you lengthen the time that they have to rent it from 6 days to 2 months or something longer that makes it less practical?
30 days.
Bill, could I?
Yeah.
Month to month. It has to be 30 days, month to month.
Pardon?
Time for me to share.
If-
Well, let's let Bill answer
I'll
the
just
question.
respond to,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry, Kathy, what was the first one again? First question?
So the first one is
Oh,
if we pass an ordinance, is it retroactive to those that are currently operating that way?
Yes. So there are 2 types of ordinances. You can enact ordinances under 2 different types of power. You have your police powers, so you can pass public health and safety ordinances. Those have 0 retroactivity. They apply to everybody from day one. Then you have your zoning power, and ordinances passed through your zoning power are retroactive. Existing users are grandfathered. This ordinance as drafted would be drafted as a public health and safety ordinance, so there would be no grandfathering. All existing STRs would have to come into compliance with this code.
Good, okay. Second question, what's to keep me from buying a house and put it in a trust or an LLC to avoid this ordinance?
Well, you would still have to comply with the ordinance. You could buy a house and you could put it in a trust, but if you desire to use it as a short-term rental for compensation, you would need to comply with this ordinance, which would mean registering, and if it's not your primary residence, and it wouldn't be because the owner would be the trust or the LLC, then as drafted, you could rent it, but you could only rent it for periods of time of 6 days, 6 consecutive days or greater.
Okay, can I increase that 6 days to 2 weeks or a month?
Yeah.
Well, the statute preempts you from exercising any restrictions above 7 days. So I think.
Did you say something about 28 days in here?
Yeah, it may.
Because like my son rents those all the time, and he never rents it for less than a week.
It's right here. Is that-
Yeah, so as the mayor points out, there's a provision in the draft that says if it's the operator's primary residence, it'll be used for more than 6 days but fewer than 29.
And what if it's not their primary residence?
Then they can, no, this is, if it is their primary residence, they can rent it for fewer than 6. If it's not their primary residence, they have to rent it for at least 6, fewer than
But that's
29.
nothing.
Pardon me?
That's nothing. 6 days is nothing.
They
That's
can
what-
rent it up to 29 days, Kathy.
Right.
At least 6, but up to 29.
You're
But-
suggesting
but
set the
I'm-
minimum,
that's-
instead of 6 days, set the minimum at 14 days?
I'd say set it as high as you could make it, because a week is standard.
29 days would be the maximum the statute would allow us
Because then
to.
it's a month-to-month
Well,
contract.
I would like us to consider, if we want to have some teeth in it, to say 29 days. That will impact many more of these places than 6 days.
Bill,
Yeah.
Teresa? you want-
yeah, I have an idea that I think would make this conversation go smoother. I really do feel this is definitely a public safety issue, massively. It's above all else a public safety issue because, as previously one of our speakers, who is my neighbor and newest Monona Grove School Board member, Phil Haven, he was talking about how the danger of these short-term rentals is not just that we don't know who's next door, but they don't know us either. They don't know that for the couple days that they're here in Monona, they're pulling in and out of a driveway where school children are walking past at certain times of the day. They're not familiar with the neighborhood. They don't understand the rhythms of the neighborhoods and the times of the day where people are out and about and where you need to slow down or where you know, it really is dangerous that way. I would also argue that there's no need to treat corporations differently than people. They should all abide by the same rule. And what is most dangerous about these short-term rentals in terms of public safety is the turnover, the frequency of turnover. In 1 week's time, again, talking with my neighbor, who has just installed a camera to make sure he's got his facts straight, he sees 4 different turnovers in 1 week. He sees the owners driving in from Madison, cleaning the place, emptying the trash, and a different car pulls in 4 times in a 7-day span. So I think, and what we have there is a business model that is like a hotel.
Yeah.
In the world of a hotel, you make your money by getting people in and out as often as possible. You just turn it over as much as possible, as fast as possible. So what we have is a dangerous situation because we have a hotel in our neighborhood, which makes it unsafe. So what we want to do is we want to focus on that business model, which is a hotel business model, which should not exist. So what I propose is that whether you're an individual or an organization, a corporation, a trust, it makes no difference. You can rent your property for as long as you want, but you cannot turn it over more than once every 6 days. Nobody is saying, you know, hey Teresa, or you know, I want to come into town for a Badger game on a Saturday. I just want to stay for one night. I don't need a 6-night rental. That's okay. I can stay at an Airbnb Saturday night, get up, leave Sunday morning. But the owner of that property cannot welcome a new guest until at least 7 days have passed. On the Airbnb site, I have a calendar, and it's going to look as though I'm renting it for 6 or 7 days, and the owner can charge me $100 for the first night and $1 for the 7 or the 6 consecutive nights. They can work out how that all turns out, but it's the turnover that's the problem, in my opinion. And I think that the turnover and the 180 days, and they don't have to be consecutive days. But if I have a property and I can only welcome guests for half the days of the year, and effectively only maybe, 52, 26, times a year, I no longer have a hotel, right? So I think that's something to consider, is the rewriting. It's not that we have to force anybody into keeping people at their property for 6 days. It's that they cannot turn it over more than once in that time frame.
Isn't that the same effect as having a 6-night minimum stay?
It is.
Okay.
But how do you enforce that people, I mean, so you rent it as a 6-night rental. It is effectively the same thing, yes.
Kathy, I know you have your hand up, but I'm just going to see if anyone else who hasn't had a chance to say anything yet. Doug, did you have something?
Yeah, I guess. 'Cause I expressed a fair amount of skepticism about some of the restrictions last time that we had talked about this, and since then I think I have viewed this more as a housing shortage problem, that there's so many houses, like Nancy had said, that are being bought up just for this purpose and driving up home prices for just regular people who actually want to move in and live in a house. So I think this is a very good direction to go. My opinion is 6-day minimum stay in the Madison area is going to effectively exclude a lot of people from renting. I mean, I suppose they could structure, like you suggested, they only, they don't have to pay very much for the extra nights, but they still have to have a minimum 6-day stay. I just don't think there's that many people coming to Madison for six days.
Yeah.
So
I just don't want to shut down there's a woman that lives just a few blocks away. You would never know that she has an Airbnb. It's
Right.
quiet, it's respectful. She has a person or two coming in for 1 or 2 nights.
Does she
a
live
couple
there?
times a month she lives there. So I don't want it to be thought that she must only have guests if the guests stay for 6 days.
Well,
they don't have to stay 3 under this, right?
Pardon me?
Wouldn't, if it's a home, if the owner's on premises, I'm not sure what the rules are.
different rules,
If it's
right?
their-
But should the owner be having a new guest every day? I mean, it's the turnover that I think is problematic.
Yeah, I guess if I'm hearing the two of you, what we could add a provision that says you shall rent to only one unique renter in any 6-7 day period. And that way, you can rent it for 1 day if you want, 2 days, 3 days, whatever, but the remainder of that week then, you can't rent it to
Can't-
somebody
can't
else.
rent- right.
You can live there yourself, but you
Right.
can't rent it to somebody else.
Patrick?
I just want to make sure that we don't make it so complicated that
Yeah.
it's hard for us to enforce this, because,
Yeah.
the more complicated that we make it, so, I
Right.
guess my thoughts are, I still feel that Madison's ordinance is worded where it's excluding the corporations, right? For, I can't remember now. What's the wording that Madison uses in reference to corporations? No, it has to be the primary residence, right? So we're doing the same thing
We're
right now?
doing the same in that regard.
In that regard?
They do have,
The language that that you thought was problematic that they approved in their ordinance, what was
right,
that?
precluding corporate ownership of any STRs.
And so I guess my question is if, and, you know, I don't want to, please don't take it as I'm like, oh, you know, Madison did a better, it's not that reason at all. I just want to know why, with 18 attorneys in the city of Madison, and they thought this would fly, why are we thinking that it's not going to?
Madison's ordinance does not preclude corporate
Oh, it doesn't?
ownership. It
Okay.
doesn't.
Okay.
As drafted, I preserved Madison's language.
Oh, okay.
What Madison's ordinance says is if it's corporate owned,
Mm-hmm.
it has to be rented for at least 6
Gotcha,
consecutive
yes.
days.
Okay, I thought you were, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Kathy?
A couple of things. When Therese says hotels aren't safe, I wonder what the current people think living next door to an unsafe hotel. I never heard of the issue of a hotel not being safe, and I don't think this is about turnover. I think this is about maintaining the community as a place where people come and live and raise their children, and not where they buy houses to rent. And I don't know how many of you rent these facilities, but my son does it all the time, and he does it sometimes when he comes to here. And my neighbor, I have an next door neighbor that does it, and I don't feel unsafe. I just don't like the fact that I'm losing the character of this nature, of this community, and six days is going to solve about 1/3 of your problem, because most of the time when they come for summer weekend, they rent for a week. And people, it is still worth their while to do for a week. So if you want to get rid of, I mean, it depends upon why we want to do this ordinance. But if we want to limit the number of these facilities so that people can afford to buy a home here, 6 days won't cut it. It just won't.
Anyone else? Nancy?
Yeah, I just want to say, I hear Kathy, but I think that I'm in agreement with Doug. I know a lot of people who rent in Madison. I mean, I've done Airbnbs on business. I've done it for pleasure. I think we probably all have.
Yep.
But here in Madison, I think that there's a lot of people, particularly during football season or, basketball playoffs or hockey playoffs or whatever, that come in for 2 or 3 days. And I don't want to preclude that from happening for those people in Monona that want to earn a little cash with their house. Like, I think that's like Teresa was saying about
Yeah.
her neighbor. I think that's perfectly okay.
Yeah.
But that's that's as a primary residence. I mean, my friends that do that here, like for football season, they leave the residence, although not everybody has to. I think this is closer, Bill. By the way, I want to say, since I was the one that brought up Madison, or one of the people that brought up Madison, was not my intention that it had to be exactly like Madison's, just that because we share a street and we're already seeing jumping going back and forth between the two communities because of Madison's ordinance and we don't have one, that I thought it was important to be closer to Madison.
We appreciate that you swallowed your pride.
I am a tender flower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And while I appreciate that there's some expediency to make a decision here, I think there's also, I would propose that we,
Oh, we're not voting on this.
okay, and, yeah, I think we should move on to the next agenda item.
Yeah, well, that's closing out.
Yeah, let's do
Brian?
that.
Has the proposed initial fee changed? What is the proposed initial fee?
Yeah, the application and renewal fee I think in the Madison ordinance said it was
$100.
$100. Consistent with how I do it for all of our ordinances, I don't put a dollar amount in the code. I reference our fee schedule. And then that way, the council every year, as you update your fees, that is automatically caught. We don't have to search through the ordinance. So this draft doesn't have a specific amount. The intent would be next time we'd have it on the agenda for finance and personnel and council to establish those fees to be put in the fee schedule.
So we treat it as a separate item, right?
Yes, ma'am.
On our previous spreadsheet, we're listed with some of our other communities, and one of our initial drafts was referencing a $1,000 fee. So that's one of the things I was suggesting of, I think my concern of the potential of a threshold for requiring registration would be associated with what it is that we're talking about for registration and re-registration. If that is in a much more alignment with other communities, closer to that $100 mark, I think this next part of considering a threshold of when you actually need to register would go away. If it remains significantly high, a few $100s, I would want us to consider a threshold of fewer than 6 nights in a given year, just throwing out round numbers right now, that there would be no requirement to comply with this ordinance at all.
How about a sliding scale? Because like next door to me, they charge $2,000 a night, which is real different than $300 a night.
So just one thing to chew on this, we're required in setting our fees, they have to approximate our cost. They can't be arbitrary, and we can't make a profit on it. The draft calls for us to inspect the properties. So with staff time and everything else, I think we could justify a $1,000 fee. It's difficult when you start having a sliding scale. It makes rational sense because their profit is going to differ, but we can't set our fees based on how profitable it is to the user. We have to set our fees based on what it costs us to manage the ordinance.
So then, given that our fee will likely be more than $100, I would put it out there for people to consider a threshold number of when this ordinance wouldn't apply and when it would apply.
Right, and I think there was, is there not a,
Currently, there is not.
we haven't decided on a fee, it's not in the ordinance.
No, but
No, currently, there's not a threshold.
the
It's-
minimum,
No, but I'm saying, but there is a threshold in that, I believe the way it was rewritten, if you had a certain number of small days, you didn't have, a certain number of 10 days or 12 days a year or whatever, you didn't have to apply.
Not currently. The way it's written now, if you rent it for one day, you would have to register and comply with everything.
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, so if your desire is to have an exemption level below X days, I can certainly include that in there. I think you had suggested 6 days, Brian?
Yeah, I need to think through that some. I was just trying to look at, okay, what, the person that is like, yeah, I want to rent something for 2-3 days, are we really wanting them to have their place inspected for $500 to do that?
You're thinking like 2 or 3 days a year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
So, and-
one can assume that any fees we charge are going to get passed on to the renters. At least everything else does, whether it's the cleaning or whether it's the other stuff. And so they usually add these costs on to the rental fees when they do it. And I wanted to add one other thing, Mary. Nancy, I never meant to preclude people who are, for whom it's a primary residence. It's the corporation or the LLCs, because I think it's pretty easy to set up an LLC.
Yeah, I know
It's
it's
very,
easy
very
to set
easy.
it up. I know it's easy to set it up. And but I do think that, to Brian's point, and to Teresa's point overall, I think I'm glad this is only first read, because I still think we need to dive into the details. But the second thing is that it's just, in my mind, even if they're going to pass it on to their renters, if we've got people in town that are renting for a few football weekends or whatever it happens to be, aside from the fact that they might be able to afford it, I don't want the city wasting their time,
Right.
or the inspector wasting their time over, somebody that's doing 10 days a year, or whatever that number is. I mean, we can come up with a number, but to me, that it just seems like for 6 or 8 or 10 days,
Yeah.
I don't.
Do they still have to comply, though, with, Dane County has health rules, right? I mean, how does that all work?
No, because the only reason they would have to comply with those health codes would be if our ordinance required it. And if we have an exemption threshold, if they're not subject to this ordinance, they wouldn't need that either.
I like that idea.
Does anybody else have anything to say? Otherwise, I think maybe this could be another case of sending your ideas to Bill. Is that
Sure.
okay?
I have 3 that I've written down. I just want to make sure I'm capturing sort of what people are looking at. I have Kathy proposing that if it's a corporate entity, the minimum rental period would be 29 consecutive days. Teresa's idea of a maximum of 1 unique renter per any 7-day period. And Brian's proposal that there be a threshold for application of the ordinance only if you rent for more than 6 days in a year.
And that number might change.
Sure, but that's what I would put in, and I'll highlight it, and then you can change it as you wish. Does that capture everything?
Thank you.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you think of anything else, Kathy, did you have
Oh,
something?
no, I was just going to, I have a very early morning radiation treatment, and I have to leave the meeting, so please vote me out.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you,
Kathy.
Kathy. I think we're almost done anyway, so.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night. Okay, so if no one has anything else, send your ideas to Bill, and we will move on to our reports section of the meeting here. So first of all, are there any updates or discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts?
I think,
Do you want to talk about the
Your-
meeting last week a little bit, or?
yeah, did we say this? I can't remember. Yeah, we had our first meeting of the DEIB group. It was really well attended. I think it's going to be fantastic. There were some decisions made. We would meet once a month for 90 minutes. There would be no recording taken. The members felt that it might get in the way of some conversations that might be a little difficult to have if the recording was on. And gosh, I think that was our general.
It was kind of an introductory.
Introductory
Get to know
meeting,
each other,
would bring
kind
you,
of.
getting to know you, yeah, it was really good. So the plan is, we're going to reread the DEIB plan and then come to the next meeting with 3 of our top, priorities. We can start narrowing things down.
Anyone else? Anyone have anything on sustainability efforts? Okay, then committee reports. Alder DePula.
I missed the last transportation meeting because of the death of my mom. So Nancy will talk about that. She's also the chair. I'll mention that we had our 4th meeting with on housing with the county, and had some really good discussions on ways to increase affordable housing in our communities. And some of it didn't necessarily apply to us because there was a lot of talk about single-family homes. And while some of it applies to us, but obviously everyone knows that we have a limited opportunity to do that. But we had some good discussions with developers that were talking about ways to incentivize them to create affordable housing, and a lot of that conversation was well received. And it's some of the things that we've sort of been talking to each other about here and there on the council. So the meetings continue to be informative, and the collaboration with other communities is valuable. And I look forward to continuing to learn more.
Alder Holmquist.
Report.
Alder Moore.
Yes, as Alder DePula said, the Transit Commission has been very busy doing three things, really. One is putting together a new survey, out of the public information meetings that we heard, or the public information meetings that we had, I should say, 3 public information meetings that we had. There were a couple of things that stood out among the many, all the feedback that we received. One is show us the need, if you will. A lot of people skeptical that given the bus numbers that we have right now, understandably wanted more of a sense of what the need is and where the need is, and asked us to do another survey. And the second thing is that they asked us to slow it down because the feeling was that we were somehow rushing it, even though it was something that had been in the Transit Commission for a year before, at least a year before, the public information meetings, the proposal. So, but effectively, we've done both of those things. We've created a new survey. It's being put up on SurveyMonkey now. It'll be posted hopefully within the next couple of weeks. We have the second thing is that we've developed a full list, meaning like 30 or so FAQs, frequently asked questions about that contrasts and discusses kind of what happens now in Metro. So it's as well as the documents that we've had previously, comparing the two, the shorthand documents, we have all those FAQs that we've developed. And the third thing is we put together an entire marketing plan to make sure that we're getting the word out across the community using all of our media channels, including postcards to every household, but also PSAs and information in the e-news, and to get as much response from the survey as we can once it's ready to go. So I would just encourage everyone in Monona to take the survey when you get the information, and to look out for that all being posted, because the Transit Commission is not going to make any decisions on anything until we get that data.
And the survey's going to be up for about a month, right?
And the survey will be up for a total of 5 weeks in the marketing plan, assuming that we get the survey up hopefully by the 17th or so of the month, and then by the time the postcard gets printed and it gets sent out and we leave time, we're going to leave it up to like the 3rd week in March. So it'll be up, and we'll be continuing to send out reminders and change the PSAs and all of that. So we want to give it at least 3 weeks, but we can put the survey up anytime, knowing that there's other things that we're going to be rolling out. So yeah.
We would like to make sure the FAQ is up before the survey, though, right? So
Yes,
people can.
we're absolutely going to have the FAQs up before the survey, and we're encouraging people to read up, soak up the FAQs and the rest of the information that's on the web before they take the survey,
Right.
which will also be part of what we announce and everything we do.
Thank you, Alder Marks. I know you have spent a ton of time on that survey,
has,
on the FAQ, and the committee spent a lot of time too, but
Yeah,
Nancy's really.
I have to say the commission's been outstanding. I mean, I appreciate the thank you as well, because I have spent a lot of time.
It's helpful to have a former.
But I really want to, kudos to the Transit Commission as well, because everybody's been rather comfortably writing by committee and providing feedback by committee, which is not always easy. So, so I thank everyone.
Great. Alder Wood,
No report.
Alder Rademacher.
All right. One of my committees, community media. All of my committees meet this week. It's a busy week. So things going on in community media. All of you received a notification that the monthly newsletter is being put together now. So please take advantage of that communication channel to get out to the community, whatever you feel they might need to know. Our volunteers, our 2 volunteers that are on top of that, they're just knocking it out of the park. I'm thinking Nancy's, FAQs for the Transit Commission could do some great stuff on VMO or in the newsletter. Also in front of the Community Media Committee is a decision, if you listen to recordings of this meeting or any other meeting, sporting events at the high school, what have you, you go to YouTube and you pull up the recording. I think I mentioned it the last time we met, we're now having an opportunity to have an app on your phone where you can it really streamlines the process to get into those recordings. So the question in front of the Community Media Committee is, what do we call the app so that people can find it and search for it, and it will not include WVMO, so it's just video. So that's community media. For Landmarks Commission, which is also meeting this week, we've got 2 kind of big things. There's a National Register nomination event, 2 of them taking place on the 22nd of February and another one on the 22nd of March at the Public Library. And it involves the Frostwoods Neighborhood Association, where folks from the State Historical Society are working together with Thor and Doug Plowman to bring some education to that neighborhood about the pros and cons of creating a historic district in Monona and what that would mean to those homeowners, and so that they can decide if they want to move forward with that. And then finally, sustainability. If you've listened to WVMO, you probably can't help but hear there's been over 140 segments, not including PSAs, between the VMO show and the Monona Minutes. There's been over 140 little snippets of information about the Winter Salt campaign, which I introduced last time we met. We've also printed we printed 2,000 very small bookmarks, just with some talking points and with the Don't Be Salty graphic, which were distributed at the library, City Hall, all the city departments, and then Alder DePula is putting them on pizza boxes and sending them out with delivery, so that's fantastic. A wonderful low-cost way to get those out into the community. So we'll be meeting this Thursday talking about the wrapping up of that campaign, which 2 of our volunteers really worked very hard on, and then assigning volunteers to work on future campaigns like No Mow May, the Earth Day Cycling event, and then the Leaf Management / Adopt a Storm Drain event or project in the fall.
Great, thank
All right.
you. City Clerk, do you have?
Yes, in-person absentee voting for the primary starts tomorrow morning at 8 and goes through the 17th at 5.
Okay. Bill, did you have any news?
No, Mayor.
Okay. Mark? did you-
No report.
I just had a couple things. Patrick talked a little bit about the Dane County Housing Committee that he and I are both serving on, and lots of great data from that, and I've been picking up copies to share with Doug for his files. It's really been some interesting information. That survey, if you haven't taken it yet, the last day is the 9th, so we're trying to get as many people as possible. I did a thing for BMO, and we've had it in the newsletter and whatever, but encourage anyone to take it. They can just go to the front page of the city website to click on the link. It is, for those of you who are new here, it is that time of year when we start looking at people on committees whose appointments are ending, and at the end of committee appointments, typically, there's a few exceptions, but run through the, like, middle of April. So every year about this time, I ask Leah to send a list of the committees that you are the chair for, not the co-chair, the list of people on that committee whose terms are up, and so that you can check with them to see if they'd like to be reappointed, if they'd like to continue. This is also a time to check in. I always hear about a couple people who, and I wish I would hear about this earlier, but who haven't been attending meetings, for half the year, and then we have a conversation about, maybe it's time, if they're problematic. Please reach out to me and let me know if anybody's problematic on your list. But I'd like you to, if not, and it's somebody you feel, I'd say the vast majority of the people on our committees are good, make good contributions. Check and see if they're interested in being reappointed. I'd like to know that by, I'd say, I don't know, I have to see when Leah gets them out, but she'll give you a date in the email, like with first week of March or second week of March, something like that, because then I will start publicizing which committees we have openings on. So look for that, and I guess the other thing is look for that transit survey soon. So if there's nothing else, there are no appointments. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Sorry, before we get there, it just occurred to me that I didn't say when I was speaking about transit that we just decided actually that the transit meeting is scheduled for this week. We're not going to meet as a commission this week because the commissioners are very busy staying on top of our marketing schedule, and we just figured it would be better to have them spend their time that way. So Transit Commission will not meet this month.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Man, I got 11 here.